Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Just going over methods and context. This comes from some of my students saying that they were struggling to understand how to answer the question to try to get towards those top end marks. Everything that I'm about to tell you is just quite a simplified way of doing it. This comes from me having marked methods and context for AQA for several years now, and the kind of things that come out from the mark scheme. So I hope you're finding it useful. The first thing that I would say is methods and context and research methods slightly different in that you do have to put it into context, and there's generally three elements to methods and context, which appears on paper one, the education paper. The first thing is that you need to talk about the specific research method that is being asked about. You then need to link it to the research topic that they are talking about, such as educational achievement, or it could be labeling or something like that. Then generally there'd be a research group. Now this could be in the question itself, or it could actually just be within the item. It may be more than one research group as well. So the item sometimes talks about pupils and parents, for example. So as long as you're talking about at least one of those throughout your answer. Now, as a rule of thumb, I would say that you need an introduction, around about 3 to 4 paragraphs, and a conclusion. In an ideal world, we would like people to write 4 paragraphs, but we understand the time constraints, and also knowledge, I suppose, and skills can make that difficult. But we're looking for around about 3 to 4 for you to be heading towards those top end of the marks scheme. So in terms of what the groups, the issues and the methods are, some examples on the board. These are the ones that through my time are the most kind of likely ones to come up and from conversations I've had with AQA over the years. Now the group ones, the most common ones are going to be the pupils, the teachers and the parents, but it is possible that it could be a question about researching in a school, and therefore you would be talking about teachers and pupils, but it's very specific about being in schools. So what you having to do is you need to link the method to the research thing that you are researching, so the group. In terms of an exam question, you can actually set your own exam question using this information quite easily. So applying material from the item, so they would normally come with an item. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses. So they do want to see at least one paragraph on strengths and at least one paragraph on weaknesses of using that research method. So you could put in whichever research method, so you can chop and change to investigate, and it would normally be a group an issue or just an issue. So for example, evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of using unstructured interviews to research parents' attitudes towards achievement. So there's the 3 parts of it. So how do we revise? But also, I think something that we need to be thinking about doing is spending a few minutes before we start answering, really thinking about what the question's asking, what the items wanting us to talk about, and how we can plan that out. So a tip I would say is, if whichever group it is that comes up, or groups, think about, well, what are the elements and issues specific to that group I need to think about. So for example, pupils. One of the things that we need to think about with pupils is their age, because we can't get consent from the pupil. We would need to get the consent from their parents. So there's an ethical thing, but what's the impact of that? So link it to pervert. So is it a practical? Is it going to be validity? Another example could be parents. What things do we need to think about that might impact on the validity, the truthfulness of the research? Well, one thing could be they don't want to be seen as being the reason why their child's not doing very well at school, so they might lie. So these are the kind of things that we need to think of. And I definitely think in your answer, make sure you do this in your answer paper as well. Don't do it around the margins or anything like that. But where you would start answering the question, write out a little bit of a plan. And once you've finished all of your planning, put a line through and start writing it, because that means that you could pick up some marks if you forget to write things or you run out of time at the end. In terms of the research methods, I think this is the thing that most people will do well at, because it's a thing that we're taught in a bit more detail. Use PET or pervert. So PET is practical, ethical, theoretical. Pervert, practical, ethical, reliable, validity, example, representativity, and theory. The representativity, the theory, the validity, and the reliability thing are just basically the T of PET all together. In my time, in my experience, I would say there are certain research methods that are unlikely to come up. Content analysis, maybe lab experiments and field experiments, but that's not to say that they couldn't. But over the years, and from what I think about what AQE are kind of looking at with methods and context, because remember, this is about research and education. And doing content analysis might be difficult, although it's not impossible through things such as websites, Ofsted reports, things like that could be content analysis. But mainly the main research methods would be the ones they focus on. So what can you do to revise, or what can you do to in your plan before you start answering your question to help you with this? Just a very simple strengths and weaknesses. So if we've got group interviews as the research method for the in context, just write down 2 or 3 strengths and weaknesses. And that allows you to then pick the ones that you know most about and the ones that you think you could write about. So for instance, strengths of a group interview is that you can have several participants at one time. So this increases your sample size. So this means that it's more representative. However, a weakness would be a group interview, particularly with pupils, the Hawthorne effect. They might show off in front of their peers, or they might not want to tell the truth, so that it impacts on the validity. But make sure that you're thinking about pet or pervert as well. Another way you can do it is just by simply writing pet or pervert down the side and just going through and thinking about, right, what's a practical advantage, disadvantage, what's a reliable advantage or disadvantage, and why. The last thing is obviously issues. So on the left hand side here, what we've got is a number of potential issues that could be looked at. So it could be on ethnicity and achievement. It could be on labeling. It could be on anything basically. And it's about reasons why things happen within education. Why is there's differences in achievement? Why there's differences in experience and things like that. All the things that you learn throughout education. And on the right hand side there, we've got some considerations. So for instance, if we're doing it on truancy, well, one big problem that we've got is that it might lack students in the class. If we're trying to find out why there's high levels of truancy, then when we go to a classroom or we go to school, then we're not going to see as many students if we go to a school that hasn't got a problem with truancy. So then that impacts on the representativity. Too busy. So teachers might be too busy. So if we're researching teachers, it might be difficult for us to carry out the research because they're too busy. Or parents might have a job, so they can't do it at certain times. That's not a problem if it's a questionnaire necessarily, but it's certainly going to be a problem if it's going to be a lengthy interview. So you need to be thinking about, if I am researching that thing, what are the potential problems that I'm going to be facing? As I said, what you need to do to get into the top band is triangulate these ideas. Your paragraph has to say, using this very specific method to research this very specific thing, we're using these very specific people. These are the strengths and weaknesses. Now, if you weren't to do that at all in your answer, you can still get in the region of say 12 marks from like a research methods point of view, but you would be struggling to get towards those higher marks. Now, what you've got to bear in mind as well, when as examiners, we are not expecting you to do it in every sentence, in every paragraph, all of the time. But you do need to try to make some at least signal towards the question or the item by using the words or by talking about that group specifically. So how do we go about answering kind of this question? So as you can see on the screen, there's a question here about the role of parents and children's achievement using questionnaires, written questionnaires. So these are ones that are filled out by hand generally. There are a number of things from this item that we can pull out within the in context. So the first thing is that parents contribute materially and culturally to their child's achievement. So we can start thinking about, okay, well, culturally, maybe they're not highly educated themselves. What issue might a lack of education of a parent have with a written questionnaire? Well, it might be that they don't know how to fill it out. They might not understand the questions. They might not understand the language that you've used. helping them with their homework. So there is going to be some people who are unable to do it because they are working longer hours. Well, that's going to also affect their ability to do a written questionnaire. They come from a long day at work and they don't want to fill out a written questionnaire, so they're not going to do it. That affects your representativity. So you've got to use the item and go through and think, well, what issue or strength can I actually pull out of this in context? Because technically, this item is your in context. These are what your paragraphs could and should be about. Last thing I want to show you is just an answer. Now, the color coding is just so that we're picking out and identifying AO1, AO2 analysis and evaluation, ideally. So as you can see here, the problem that's been raised is that the parents may not understand the questions. And this could be because the parents' own education and attitudes affect their ability to will it or a willingness to help. So if you are a parent who has got a low educational background yourself, you might not be able to help your child with their homework, and that's going to impact on their ability to achieve. The next thing that this answer goes into is actually just highlighting a little bit of analysis already by saying this, and when we're talking about analysis, normally we talk about the impact on the research. What's the problem? And linking it to pet or pervert. So they don't get valid data or the questionnaire doesn't come back. The next thing that we go into here is the AO2. And this answer actually starts bringing in a little bit of context from education by talking about Douglas and Bernstein, who recognize that parents do contribute to child's achievement. You don't have to do that, but certainly this person is trying to achieve the higher marks by bringing in some more synoptic links from education. So if the parent has low levels of educational achievement themselves or don't speak English as their first language, which we know is also a contributing factor, then they might not understand the question, meaning they're unable to answer it. And also, as written responses are generally completed away from the researcher, generally at home, then they can't ask for help or clarification. So then they've got two choices. They either make it up and put anything down, which is the next thing about the validity, or they just don't return it at all, which is going to lower your sample size as a researcher, and that impacts on representativity. Now, evaluation, what you do with evaluation of a weakness is generally try to think of how could you overcome it, but what you must not do is bring in an alternative research method. That would be classed as juxtaposed. You're not fixing the problem by bringing in a new research method. You've got to say, well, how could I overcome it by still using written questionnaires? Well, one way you could do it is by ensuring that the code used is more restricted code, perhaps, which is more simplistic language, which is more easily understood by everybody. Or you put it in an alternative language. So if you are researching people who are going to be, there's a high ethnic minority group in that group, and they might be, say, first generation and their parents have come here from another country, they might not speak English. So thinking about alternative language, but that would add additional costs and time, as this answer says. Now, if this was a strength, what you would do in your evaluation is actually raise a potential weakness or evaluate actually how strong is that strength that you've talked about. And what we talk about when we're saying about a weakness, not bringing in a different weakness, but actually a consideration that you might need to think about with this strength. I'm hoping that's been useful. If you've got any specific questions or anything that needs clarified, stick it in the comments section, and I'll try and get back to you. But that is a nice, brief, basic way of trying to achieve a good grade, a good mark in methods and context. Remember, don't stress yourself out thinking about that you need to write about everything in every single paragraph. As long as the examiners are saying that it's being done on a consistent basis and that you are making efforts to do that, then you're going to gain quite a good mark. Okay, great. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Bye.